Hi, I'm Jennifer Hancock, and this is Ask a Humanist for February 2013. And this show, I got a lot of questions about politics and political issues and social justice issues. So today, that's what we're going to talk about. What is the humanist approach to a variety of these issues? Now, the first question I have is from How Dude, and he wants to know, why haven't humanists united to create change? And the answer is, we have. Like, the history of the organized humanist movement is a history of social justice work. One of the huge issues that humanists were actually organized, the reason we have an organized movement of humanists, is because of the issue of women's right to reproductive health, not just abortions, but contraception, and a woman's right to own property outside of her husband, and the right of a woman to be treated as a human being. This was really a huge reason for the humanists to organize in the first place. So about 70, 80 years ago, 90 years ago, the humanist movement organized, and this was one of the first things we worked on. And obviously we were pretty successful, because women now have the right to have an abortion, and they have a right to health care, and they have a right to contraception. You can buy a contraception without a prescription. You don't have to be married to get contraception. And women are allowed to own property on their own. And all of this was kind of spearheaded by the humanist movement. The same thing goes for education. You think about what education was 80, 90 years ago, and you think about what it is now, and that was part of what the humanist movement was doing. We organized to change education, and we succeeded. So when the religious right complains that education is too humanistic, they're right. That's the point. It wasn't working before. Religious education is okay for religious education, but if we want kids to be productive members of society, we need to teach them those skills. And we need to treat them as human beings with rights. And obviously, there's things can go too far. Obviously, there's a balance, but overall, yeah, things are better for women, for kids. Yeah. And before that, you go back to, the humanist movement really only existed since the early 1900s, so the 20s and 30s. Disability rights. Yeah, humanist. Helen Keller. Yeah, humanist. The civil rights movement. A. Philip Randolph, Bayard Rustin. Yeah, humanists. So humanists have been organized to create social justice, social change since we've organized. That is why we created an organized movement. So when you join the American Humanist Association, it's not just saying I'm a humanist. You don't need a card from an organization to say you're a humanist. You either are or you aren't. It's a philosophy. You join groups like the American Humanist Association or the Center for Inquiry or the Council for Secular Humanism to have a group that will advocate for issues on your behalf. There's also a Secular Coalition of America that is doing lobbying work on behalf of free thinkers and secularists and humanists in Congress. And the big issues are religious exemptions for child abuse. We don't think religious groups should be exempt from the child welfare laws. The proselytization that goes on in the military to our service members, that's not cool either. And actually you can go back through history and, look at the free thought movement of the late 1800s. The precursor to the humanist movement was the free thought movement of the late 1800s, and they abolished slavery. They got women the right to vote. So why don't humanists unite to create change? We have been. The entire existence of these movements is organized around creating change. So just join one of the groups and get involved, because that's what these groups do. Now, that doesn't mean we agree on everything. This is the interesting thing about humanism. It's an ethical philosophy, and it's very much an active philosophy. We believe in human agency. We believe that we have not only the ability to create change, but that we have a moral responsibility to make sure that the change we create is good. And that's the hard part, isn't it? Is that it's not enough to want to create change. You actually have to spend quite a bit of time thinking about how to create change and what change would be beneficial and what change might not be so beneficial. And we disagree. Humanists disagree on a lot of this stuff. And I think this is why humanists get so frustrated, is they see something very clearly as a moral issue, and it is, but they can't convince all the rest of the humanists to agree with them that this is a moral issue. And not that they don't agree that it's a moral issue, but what the proposed solution to the problem. We all agree on what the problem is. We can't necessarily agree on what's going to work to fix that problem. So, how to ask specifically about Palestine. How do humanists feel about Palestine? And the answer is humanists are conflicted on the issue of Palestine. When it comes, moral reasoning is difficult. It takes a lot of work. This is one of the reasons why humanists we spend so much time on critical thinking skills. We're not doing it to just debunk religion. I mean, if that's all you use critical thinking for, you're not critical thinking like a humanist, because we're using our critical thinking skills for moral reasoning in addition to fact-checking things. And you need the facts. In order for you to have a moral solution, you have to know what the facts are, and if what you think is true isn't true, then your moral reasoning is going to be flawed as a result. You also have to think through the morality really well. You have to have proposed solutions that are going to work and not cause more harm. All of these are moral issues that require critical thinking skills. Now, when we look at something like Palestine, we can immediately see why humanists don't agree. The main reason is getting factual information about the history of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict is really hard to do. When I first started researching it, I would go to a Palestinian site to find out what they thought the history was. And it's a list of massacres. And then you go to the Israeli sites and you look at their history, and it's completely different. Well, the problem is, who's telling the truth? And how do you tell? How do you get an unbiased source that will help you figure out who's telling the truth and who's not telling the truth? Because until you know that, your moral reasoning will be flawed. And so what happens with humanists in the Palestinian issue is the reason we take different positions. The reason there's some people who are pro-Palestinian, some people are pro-Israeli, and a whole bunch of people who are for the third or fourth solution, like the two-state solution and the secularizing of Israel so that it's not a religious state. There's all sorts of proposals by humanists within Israel and within Palestine, and there have been through the history of the conflict. The reason there's so many is this is not an easy issue, and what you believe is true is going to dictate what side of this you come out on. And because getting the information is so hard, that's the reason I think we don't have a consensus on Palestine. Now, the best place I've been to is the UN actually has a history of the Palestinian conflict. There's 4 websites full of information, and it's really kind of cool because they quote the humanists in Israel at the time that these things were, like, before the foundation of Israel, when it was still Palestine. They're interviewing humanists. So it is kind of interesting to look at that history, and it's the most unbiased one I've seen. So if you're concerned about that, that's pretty much the way to go. Sorry, I'm losing power. So I'm back. So that's why we don't have consensus. We also don't have consensus on economic issues. Both Marx and Hayek were humanists. They agreed on what the problem is, and their proposed solutions to economy, polar extremes. So I think what you find with humanists is we'll agree on what the problem is, and we'll agree on what the solution should look like. What we don't agree with is how to get there exactly. And when humanists do agree on a solution to a social issue, I think the rest of the world really should pay attention, because getting humanists to agree is like herding cats. When we do agree, it means the evidence in favor of something is overwhelming, and it can't be ignored anymore. Up until that point, we'll disagree on everything. All right, so, and move on to the next question. George wants to know, what is the humanist viewpoint on capital punishment? And that one we actually do have consensus on. I know, it's a shocker. Now, it's not 100% consensus. You go into a room of humanists, and if you have 100 humanists, about 98 of them will be opposed to capital punishment. they'll be for abolition. And you might have one or two that are for capital punishment, but they're conflicted. They're still kind of conflicted on the issue. They view it as a less than ideal solution. But usually when they get educated, they go, oh, I didn't know that, and then they come over to the abolition side. So the evidence in favor of abolition, I can tell you at this point, is overwhelming. And humanists view this as not only a human rights issue, that humans have the right to life, and we're for treating people, even heinous people, as human beings. And if we wouldn't want it done to us, we wouldn't want it done to anybody else. It's, do unto others. And, but more than that, it's ineffective, from a criminal justice standpoint. If you're trying to reduce crime, capital punishment is a really crappy way to go about preventing murders. And I know the argument is, but you prevent this person from killing again. Yeah, but it doesn't, what prevents murders is the likelihood of being caught, not the punishment. And, the moral reasoning behind abolition is not just that it's a human rights issue and that, but that we only have the right to use as much force as is necessary to extract ourselves from a dangerous situation. If someone's punching us in the face, shooting them in response is excessive if we could have walked away. This is why those stand your ground laws are so problematic. We feel we have a moral obligation to extract ourselves from violence and only use violence as a last resort to protect ourselves. Well, when it comes to the death penalty, this person's already incarcerated. They're already in the criminal justice system. They're not in immediate danger of killing anybody. All right, we've already taken them out of the ability to kill again because they're now in the criminal justice system. So how much force can we use to keep them from killing again? Well, it's, the minimal amount of force is incarceration. Like, killing them is kind of excessive in that framework. And this is why humanists overwhelmingly across the globe are opposed to the death penalty. We want it abolished everywhere. When you see news articles from other countries about when they're having a discussion on whether to abolish the death penalty or not, you see humanism being actively invoked for abolition. And so, name the country, and if they're discussing abolition of the death penalty, they're invoking humanism as a reason to abolish the death penalty. So worldwide, humanists tend to be against the death penalty. Now, it's possible we're doing that for self-serving reasons, and that is that places that have blasphemy laws that have the death penalty for blasphemy tend to come down heavily on humanists and other freethinkers. We get sentenced to death in countries that have death sentences for blasphemy a lot. So, do we like the death penalty? No. No one should be killed for holding ideas that are unpopular. And the death penalty is used that way. The death penalty used to be used in the United States to kill black people who had sex with white women, consensual sex with white women. And so, the death penalty is rarely used for social justice. It's used for social control. And that's another reason why it should be abolished. It's completely unnecessary. It's extremely expensive. I live in Florida, which is a death penalty state. And we have a movement to abolish the death penalty to save money in our budget because of how much more expensive the death penalty is than incarceration. And even including incarceration for life without parole, the death penalty is not just a little bit more expensive than life without parole. It's really a lot more expensive. The next question was, are there any current or past political ideologies whose values are similar to the values of humanism? And the answer to that is, absolutely yes. There are. And but they change, and humanists don't always agree with them. Like I said before, the financial question, like how do you lean Marxist or do you lean towards Hayek in what you think the proper role of government is in the economy? And either way you're leaning towards a humanist. Marx was a humanist and Hayek was a humanist. And the reason they were writing about the economy is it has such an impact on human life, and they didn't agree. And this is, so So the values of humanism are going to infuse most political ideologies, most but not all. But the particular policy proposals of any particular ideology are going to vary widely, despite the fact that the values are present. Because it's not just the values, it's how we apply them. And you see this in the difference between like libertarianism and progressivism. Now, humanism is a progressive philosophy. And so when you see progressive movements throughout history, they tend to be very, very closely aligned to the values of humanism. Libertarianism is kind of like that. It's got elements of that. And there's certainly humanists who are libertarians. But it kind of puts one of the values of humanism above all the others. So humanism, I like to think of humanism as kind of a balance of values, that we value individual liberty and autonomy, but we also value social responsibility. And the question that a humanist is always asking ourselves is, how do we balance the needs of the individual against our responsibilities to the community in which we live? And that's not a question that you get, libertarians tend to get tripped up on that question quite a bit, because, you know, liberty is the highest good. Well, for a humanist, we're balancing more of our values in a more balanced way, I think. I like to think. So while there are humanists who profess libertarianism, most humanists, I think, are progressive. Humanism is a progressive philosophy of life that, without supernaturalism, affirms our ability and our responsibility to lead ethical lives of personal fulfillment that aspire to the greater good of humanity. So we are involved in social justice issues. We're involved in the women's rights movement, racial rights movements, equality, justice. Right now, a huge amount of humanist work is geared towards the LGBTQ1-2 community for equal rights there. Is unrelated to the social justice issues, but it kind of is related. And that is, Lee wanted to know, what do you do when someone asks you to pray with them? And, you know, specifically he wanted to know, you know, he's got a religious relative, he goes to dinner, and they don't know that he's not a humanist because the patriarch is like really violently anti-atheist, so he doesn't want to come out to this guy. But he gets asked to pray and lead the prayer at dinner time, so what does he do? And I think everywhere you go, you know, non-prayers are asked to participate in prayer, and it's a problem. And how do people who don't pray participate, or you know, respect the right of people who want to pray while not participating in the prayer themselves and not being forced to pray? And that's a huge problem. And I think what happens in the social debate about government prayer, when this comes into the issue of government prayer, is that there's a desire to, there are people who want to push their religion and force everybody to pray with them. But there's more people, I think, just don't understand what the harm is. That's the question that always gets asked. What's the harm? Just don't participate. And what I think they don't understand is, well, that's the point. We want to participate. And we want to be part of the community. And we want to acknowledge that we are part of the community. And prayers, all prayers, exclude people who don't pray, period. And there's no way to include people, everybody, inclusively, if you're going to start things off with a prayer. It's not that I'm not offended by prayer. And I'm not offended by people wishing me a Merry Christmas either, even though it's a little late because it's February. You know, I'm not offended by that. But if I'm in a government meeting, I want to be able to be considered an equal citizen to everybody else in that room. And if the government is praying and telling me in order to participate I have to pray with the government, that excludes me. That's telling me I'm a second-class citizen. So it's not that the prayer itself is offensive. It's that it's excluding me from a venue that I want to participate in and have a right to participate in. Now, if I'm in someone's house and they're praying at dinner, I don't say boo. I don't complain about it at all. I hold hands. and I let the prayer happen, and I think my own happy thoughts about how grateful I am that people are going to feed me and how much I like everybody in the room despite the fact that they're praying. And then I think to myself, well, hopefully the prayer won't go on too long, and that's kind of a prayer of my own. Please don't let this prayer last too long. And then we eat and everybody's fine. So on a personal level, it's not a problem. It's only when it's a government thing that it becomes an issue, because the government doesn't have the right to tell me I don't have the right to participate. They don't have the right to actively and aggressively exclude me from participating in government. They just don't. And it's not about people being anti-prayer. It's not about people not liking Christmas. I celebrate Christmas. It's about respecting the diversity of religious belief in this country. If we're religiously free, then we need to respect the fact that people don't all, participate. They don't all pray. So what do you do when someone asks you to pray with them? Well, that all depends on the context. If it's family and friends, I hold hands and I let them pray and I don't say anything. If I am asked to pray, I'm usually honest and I say, I don't know any prayers. I'm not a religious person. You all go ahead. Or I'll say something kind of cheeky like good bread, good meat, good God, let's eat, that everybody can laugh at. All right. But it's really hard. And I think, one of the things I'd like to see happen, and, it's kind of a project in my head, is we need a little book of non-prayer prayers for exactly the situation, so that when people are asked to contribute something, they have something they can say that they feel good about that will be inclusive of everybody, but not kind of mark them as an outsider or someone who's trying not to participate. Because when you're in a group setting, you don't want to be marked as an outsider who's kind of anti the rest of the group. You're trying to fit in. You want to fit in. So we need things like that. And the final question is a vegetarian question. Why are humans more privileged and less expendable than, say, a chicken? Because chickens have more protein, so theoretically they should be more valued. And they certainly are if they're tasty. Now, I happen to own 4 chickens, get lots of eggs from them, not planning to eat them. But humans frown on cannibalism. That's why killing humans and eating them is not acceptable, but most people view killing and eating a chicken to be just okay because it's a chicken. And this is, yes, species bias. But it's not just humans, right? I mean, there's a big scandal right now about horse meat in our beef. So, and this is a kind of a European white, Western world scandal. And, the question I have, I don't eat a whole lot of beef. So, I don't come across, I don't go out to fast food a lot. So I don't think I've been affected by this. But the question I have as a humanist is, why is eating cow okay, but eating a horse is not okay? I don't understand, why one is okay and what is not okay. So I understand the vegetarian's dilemma on this, why is it okay to eat one and not eat another? And that's a very, very good question. But we've been talking about, humanists don't agree on the vegetarian issue. I have friends that are vegan, I have friends that are vegetarian, and I have friends that are meat eaters that are all humanists. And I think Glass-Grin is right. It's culturally determined what's acceptable and what's not acceptable. I'm pretty sure when I was in China, I ate cat meat at one point. I'm not entirely sure because we couldn't tell what we were eating. And, it happens. So, where you live determines what you're willing to eat. Some people don't eat frogs. Some people don't eat snails. Some people really like them a lot. And meat, I look at it and I think, well, meat is meat. And, even a vegetable is a living creature. Now, the vegetable, I think, is more acceptable to most people because A, it doesn't have to be face, and B, we don't have to kill the plant to eat a part of the plant. You don't kill a tree, an orange tree, to eat an orange, right? The tree will be just fine if you harvest its fruits, and it actually wants you to harvest its fruit for reproductive purposes. So, it's a big issue, and humanists, this is one of those issues humanists just don't agree on. And some people are squeamish about it. When I was in China and we were talking about hamburgers, our teacher was just horrified by the idea of ground meat. It wasn't the meat, because he ate meat. It was the idea that you would grind meat up and then form it into a patty that disgusted him. So a lot of this stuff is cultural. And, you know, there's certainly a moral argument for vegetarianism, but there's also moral arguments for omnivorism, which humans have a digestive tract for omnivorism. So there you go. Thank you guys for participating. I love the comments on this. And, you know, see you next month. And like I said, I think my YouTube channel is Sumo Girl 1. But just type in Jen the Humanist and you'll find me. And you can also get a link to it on my website, jen-hancock.com. I do these monthly, and there's usually a theme to them, and I answer about 3 questions. So I'll see you next month. It's usually the 3rd Wednesday of the month, by the way. Bye-bye.